Welcome to the Red Dice Diaries, and in this video we're going to be talking about epic tales, and we're going to be running down our list of the top 20 things, objects and archetypes that you can include in your RPGs to give them that grand sense of scale that is so important in an epic game. So at number one, we have the idea of the journey, which is an archetypal concept included in most epic tales. And it's even influenced the public consciousness to such a degree that it appears in reality TV shows even. You'll often hear contestants, when they give their life story spiel, talking about how whatever competition they're involved in has been a fantastic journey for them. The journey in an epic tale is often partly physical, reflecting the character moving through the many landscapes of the fantastic tale, but is also often reflected by a spiritual or psychological component, with characters changing as the story progresses, which has the effect of making them seem more rounded and complex. At number two on our list, we have a sense of huge scale. Now, this is important because it gives the sense of a much larger world, supporting and buoying up the actions of the story. Having this sense of a larger world is provides verisimilitude to the setting, and it also takes us handily into our number three on this list, which is history. Now, creating a sense of history in a setting can be as simple as littering around a few odd buildings or structures, or as complex as creating myths and ancient legends that have been passed down for many years by the NPCs, by the fathers, the grandfathers within the setting. The benefit of creating this history to the game is that it makes your world come alive and seem much more three-dimensional. The characters' actions no longer happen in a void, and as they make their mark on history, it empowers them to change the future of their world and write their own names, or at least those of their characters, in the annals of history. At number four, we have fantastic or inaccessible locations. And having locations that are really writ large and fantastic in a game help to reinforce the epic feel and that sense of scale we were talking about earlier. Games with smaller or more normal locations tend to have a more personal or familiar feel, which is fine if that's what you want, but it doesn't tend to produce that epic feeling without some additional work being done. Whereas having locations that are thoroughly divorced or separate from what we consider to be the everyday, it really hammers home that sense that you're experiencing something extraordinary and fantastic. At number five, we're going to talk about how the story locations often provide contrast. And in an epic game or tale, locations tend to reflect what occurs there or their importance to the plot or narrative. For example, the coldly clinical corridors of the Death Star in the Star Wars film franchise, which is a huge weapon designed to obliterate planets without any feelings or remorse, reflected by the cold fluorescent lights and grey scenery. Locations can also change physically, reflecting some form of internal or motivational changes that have taken place there. For example, the Tower of Saruman, as his forces tear up the landscape in Lord of the Rings in order to fuel his dark industry, reflects the White Wizard falling ever more under the sway of Mordor and the Dark Lord Sauron. This is important within a game and a tale because, as well as providing the audience and the players a good hint of the mood or the theme of the location, the change related to the action closer to home also reinforces the idea that even the smallest action can ripple outwards to affect the larger scale aspects of the setting. At number six, we have huge battles, and most tales feature huge battles at some point, whether these be between armies of men and orcs or the massive fleets of two stellar empires clashing. And those are just two examples. There are many, many more. Huge battles work to reinforce the sense of scale that we were discussing, and they're normally action-packed and very exciting. They provide both an element of danger and risk to the characters, whilst also forcing them to reveal aspects of their character and confront certain issues, whilst under pressure, that might otherwise have remained hidden, adding an additional element of texture to the characters, since it's only when placed under pressure or conflict that some of us reveal certain aspects of our character. Battles are often sparked by a snowballing of events that began with something much smaller. That speaks to the motivation of one or more of the characters involved, illustrating how the actions of one or a few people can sometimes cause huge sweeping changes within the setting. At number 7, we have the idea of fellowship. Now, this brings things back to a more personal scope, and most epics traditionally focus around the actions of a small group of heroes or characters who the spotlight normally shines down on. And this is not normally a problem in RPGs where players usually portray a group of characters working together. A fellowship allows you for closer scenes of personal interaction to both mirror and contrast with the grander scale events occurring, showing that the setting can affect the character as much as, if not more, than they affect it, and never letting the players forget that they are the focus of the game, and this huge, grand, epic setting that you've created is there to support them and provide them with the game that they want, and that they can change it by their own actions. At number 8, we have the insignificant object or MacGuffin, which normally is a small item that seems insignificant at first, but later proves crucial to the plot and narrative. Such items are often magical in nature, such as the One Ring, etc. The item, when revealed, becomes a primary motivator normally for some or all of the characters in the tale, and it can also be used to justify plot curves, and although the idea has been done quite a few times and thus has lost much of its power to surprise us, the pursuit of such an item has begun many a promising campaign. At number 9, we have the concept of prophecy, and a prophecy or prophecies both reinforce the sense of a larger setting and the idea of some kind of fate or destiny operating behind the scenes of your world. It offers the players a glimpse of how high or how low their player characters can rise or fall eventually. And the idea of a fate or destiny can provide a great motivator for characters, whether they choose to rail against their destiny or rush to embrace it. Prophecy is a great tool for the GM to foreshadow upcoming events within the game, and as prophecy is normally a little bit vague, it doesn't cause too many problems if the players step a little bit outside of initial expectations. It's an ever-present part of traditional mythology that role-playing is, at least in part, based on, and where many epics originate, so including it can, if done correctly, really reinforce that mythic feeling in a game. However, you do need to be careful not to convince the PCs that they have no free will, otherwise they'll likely become disenchanted with the game, and rightly so. Who would want to play in a game where all your choices are made for you? That defeats the point of an RPG, in my opinion. At number 10, we have the power of magic and or faith, and this often appears in the epics, and the explanation of how this works often ties into the scope and history of a setting. The presence of gods meddling in human affairs or granting boons to their loyal followers also harkens back to classic mythology in some senses. Magic provides a useful opportunity for the GM and the players, and justification for having narrative and plot elements where impossible things occur or are accomplished. At number 11, we have the old master and the young apprentice as we turn more towards character archetypes and relations in our countdown. The idea of the old master and the young apprentice is one that features in many large-scale stories. The old master can be a great way of introducing the history of a setting that we talked about earlier and putting a face on it, personalizing it and bringing it down to a more local level that can be more easily digested by your players. The young apprentice in this relationship is most often at the beginning of their journey, whilst the old master is drawing near the close of theirs. This provides contrast and a potential goal for the character. Perhaps one day they'll be as powerful as the old master and they'll pass on their teachings in turn. So it also maintains a sense of continuity within the setting. At 12 we have the faithful servant or sidekick, and this is a concept that often appears in the epics, whether this be Jesse in Breaking Bad or Samwise Gamgee in Lord of the Rings. They often seem to have a little role in the unfolding drama, a bit like the apparently insignificant MacGuffin or item we mentioned earlier. However, in time and with the support of the main heroes, they often rise above their perceived limitations to help the characters achieve their aims. And sidekicks provide a great opportunity for interpersonal roleplay, and their advancements/development can be guided by that of the PCs in an RPG game, showing on a very personal level the effect that player characters can have on NPCs. For instance, if the PCs are kind and help train the sidekick, but perhaps he comes through for them and provides additional clues or support in their time of need. Whereas if they abuse the trust of their sidekick, does he maybe sell them out to the villain or leave and become one of the villain's lieutenants? All of this can provide very interesting fodder for the player characters to really get their teeth into. At 13, we have the person who changes significantly, and this refers back to the first point in our list of the journey. In most epic tales, the protagonists are significantly changed by the trials and tribulations that they face. When the story ends, they are no longer the same person who began the tale. This is important to lend a sense of gravitas and realism to the character. After all, in real life, we're all constantly changing and adapting to new situations. How much more so would the characters in an epic be changed by these large-scale experiences and trials that they have to face? At 14, we have the powerful villain and the less powerful hero. Traditionally, at the start of a tale, the villain of the piece is far more powerful in some way, whether militarily or personally, or perhaps even both, than the main protagonist, the heroes of the piece, if you will. The heroes begin less powerful, and it sort of makes it easy to sympathise with them because they are the underdogs. Typically, the heroes change and evolve during the course of the tale, rising to the point where they can challenge the villain, whilst the villain themselves normally changes little and remains static, unless they achieve a last-minute redemption, and we'll come to that in a little bit. We identify less traditionally with the powerful villain, and therefore we're more likely to support the heroes. The more powerful villain also gives a sense that the heroes will need to undergo many challenges in order to defeat them, reinforcing this notion of the journey and the grand scale of the journey that's to be undertaken. However, at some point, as number 15 on our list points out, the hour will seem dark as the villain gains the upper hand, and it looks as though the heroes have no chance of success. Trite though it may seem, the phrase "the darkest hour before the dawn" is a very apt one here. By making it seem as though the heroes have no chance, the sense of elation is that much greater when they pull through, and the chance of triumph that much stronger. In an RPG, however, unlike a story, you need to be careful not to convince your players that they have absolutely no chance, or persevering with the game may seem pointless, and quite rightly they might lose interest. At 16, we have another great motivator for characters, which is the death of an old master or a friend. This can really form the crux of a character motivation, and If they died at the hand of the villain, it reinforces the villain's place as the bad guy of the setting. It also works as an RP challenge for the players, giving them free rein to roleplay their character's grief and how they cope and handle it, and how it changes them as a character. At 17, we have the temptation and redemption of the villain or anti-hero. At some point, one of the players will traditionally be tempted by the side of evil, or perhaps an NPC associate goes over to the dark side. Does the PC join with the bad guy, or do they fight against them? This can be a really great way of showing the players how, if they had made different choices, they could have ended up the same way as the setting's villain. This helps add an additional layer of complexity to your villain, as well as provide some interesting choices and options to your players. And it makes your villain seem something more than just a cardboard cutout, moustache twirling stereotype, which is something to be encouraged. At 18, we have the romance subplot, and a romance subplot is a great way to bring things back down to a personal level. It also helps add a bit more detail and interest into a setting, as it encourages characters to explore their emotions a little bit more, and how a relationship copes under the stresses imposed on the setting and the characters in an epic tale. Tragic romances are a staple of mythology, and so an epic love affair that goes horribly wrong can be a powerful motivator for the character and really helps bring back again this mythic feel that we're trying to capture here. Second to last on our list at 19, we have monsters or giant beasts, and these can function very much like strange and fantastic locations. The presence of monsters and or giant beasts helps maintain the air of the exotic and the fantastic in games. However, such things should never be overused or they become commonplace and they lose any sort of impact, whereas putting them in occasionally helps show that this game world differs from the real world that we know and establishes it as something more fantastic, something grander, something more epic, and that's what you want to achieve when going for this large scale of game. Finally, at number 20, we have the triumphant return or the victory. And at the end of an epic, there's normally a victory, whether it is Pyrrhic or not, with the heroes returning back to a world that they have rid of the villain of the setting. This is a good time to demonstrate how the heroes have been changed by their experiences, and I find one of the best ways to do this is by contrasting them against people they used to know who have remained the same during the course of the tale, whilst the characters have evolved and developed. We see this in numerous epics. One example is The Lord of the Rings, when the hobbits finally return to the Shire after the One Ring has been destroyed, and most of the other inhabitants of Hobbiton have not changed much. They go about their pastoral, peaceful lives, whereas those who have been on the adventure are very much changed and are not the same characters they were at the beginning. This should be used by the GM to give the players a sense of closure and round off an epic campaign. A final summary of how the players' hopes, dreams, triumphs, and defeats have changed not just themselves, but the world and the setting of your game. Well, there you have my top 20 concepts, archetypes, and elements to include in an epic scale game. I'm sure there are probably more. If you've got any suggestions, please feel free to hit me up in the Google Plus links or the comments box below. I hope you've enjoyed this video and you'll click on like and subscribe. We release new videos every Wednesday. Until I see you in the next one, thank you very much for listening and for watching. Take care.